Hello, I'm Darlene Zimmerman, registered dietitian with the Heart Smart program at Henry Ford, and continuing from where we left off last time, eating smart for a healthy heart. I want to tackle fats today. Healthy fats to use, not so healthy fats to use, and we'll also spend a little time talking about salt and sodium. We'll start with the bad news first, and that is trying to limit, not eliminate, but just lower our intake of saturated fat and also try to get rid of trans fats in our diet. Saturated fats are typically fats that are solid at room temperature. So examples would be butter, a heavily marbled meat. Picture a T-bone steak in front of you. The fat on the outer edge would be an example of a saturated fat. The streaks of fat marbled through that muscle itself, through that meat itself, would be saturated fat. Full-fat dairy foods like cream and whole milk and 2% milk, cheese, all sources of saturated fat. And there are a few tropical oils that are also high in saturated fat: coconut oil, palm oil, and palm kernel oil. The reason we're trying to take in less saturated fat is because saturated fat is the fat that can clog our arteries and increase our blood cholesterol level, especially the bad part of our blood cholesterol level called the LDL. Another fat that's not so good for our heart is called trans fats. And if you look at the second bullet point, it says when liquid oils are partially hydrogenated, trans fats are created. Partially hydrogenated, what the heck does that mean? All it means is somewhat hardened. They take a liquid oil and they harden it. When that process happens, trans fats are formed. So think of shortenings. Some vegetable shortenings would have trans fats in them. Stick margarine would have trans fats in it, or any foods that are made with those ingredients. So again, we're trying to lower our intake of saturated fat and trying to eliminate our intake of trans fats. And again, as we already mentioned, the downside to saturated fat and trans fats is that they can clog our arteries and increase our blood cholesterol level. Healthier fats to use. Want you to know we certainly can add fat to our diet, and there are many healthy choices. You may see on some food labels the term monounsaturated or polyunsaturated. Not that those terms are important to know, but fats are often divided into those two groups. Examples of monounsaturated fats would be olive oil and peanut oil and canola oil. It's the fat that you find in nuts and seeds. It's the fat that you find in avocados. Polyunsaturated fats would be corn oil and soybean oil and sunflower oil. It's also fat that you find in nuts and seeds. These are much healthier fats to use. I don't want to give you the impression that since these are healthy fats to use, that it's great to deep fat fry everything in canola oil and I could have a dish of olive oil on the table and dip my bread in it all dinner long. Too much fat, even when it's healthier for us, winds up being not so good if I'm taking in too much. Another healthy fat that I'm sure you've heard of, omega-3 fatty acids. It's the fat that you find in fish. Many heart health benefits come with taking in this fat. If you enjoy eating fish, it's your best place to get these omega-3 fats. If you're not too fond of fish or you're allergic to fish, you will find omega-3s in walnuts and ground flaxseed. You'll find it in soybean, canola, and flaxseed oil. But if you're willing to eat fish and you like to eat fish, that's really the best place to get these healthy omega-3 fats. Salt and sodium. Let's tackle that a bit here. Of course, most of us take in more salt than we need, and cutting back is certainly a helpful thing when it comes to our blood pressure. In looking at where most of our salt comes from, these three places, salt that's added at the table or in cooking, processed foods that we buy at the stores, or foods that we eat in restaurants, thinking about where most of our sodium comes from is kind of interesting. Understanding where most of it comes from is a good idea because it's where I can make the greatest impact on lowering my intake if I understand where the majority of sodium is coming from. And where most of it is coming from, as you probably already knew, it's processed foods. About 65% of the sodium we take in comes from foods that we buy at the store. So focusing attention on foods that I buy in stores is certainly a way to help lower sodium intake. If you're wondering about how much salt most of us take in over the course of the day, you have 3 options here. If you guessed 3,400 milligrams, you were right. That is about the amount of sodium that most of us take in over the course of the day. In comparing that to what should we be taking in, 2,400 milligrams of sodium a day is certainly a reasonable intake. You may see in some information that 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day is recommended for people who are 51 or older, for African Americans, for people with high blood pressure, diabetes, or chronic kidney disease. We always recommend that if your doctor has given you a specific sodium recommendation, follow their recommendation. But we also like to be realistic with people in that 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day is a pretty tall order. It's a pretty restrictive intake. So even if that budget applies to you, you may want to stick 2,400 milligrams of sodium in your head as a nice, healthy sodium intake as a goal for the day. Making cutbacks from there is certainly a great thing to do if you can do it, but we certainly want to be realistic in the goals that we set for ourselves. So again, there's nothing wrong with having a goal of 2,400 milligrams of sodium over the course of the day. And the whole reason for focusing in on sodium, of course, is the relationship between taking in too much salt and raising our blood pressure. Taking in too much salt can put extra stress on our heart, and it can lead to stroke, kidney disease, and heart failure. This concludes our session on healthy fats and sodium. Thank you for your attention.